Hello everyone, and welcome back to another video with On Point Politics. Make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and drop a comment down below before we get started with the video. Now, we're going to be talking about what would happen if Donald Trump is convicted in his New York case as of right now. And so pretty much we see that, this case is going on in the state of New York. And, there's a lot of people who have different perspectives on it, that it's politically, motivated or it's not. My personal opinion is that it is. However, when we look at polling data, what's actually pretty interesting is that every time something legal has come up in favor, or not in favor, but at least, going against Trump, every time Trump has had something legal come up, he actually gets a decent boost in the polling aggregates every single time that occurs. And so what I think is going to happen is Donald Trump's polling lead, I think, may dwindle by a little bit. Like, this prediction is essentially what would happen, like what would the data show the day after. Basically, I think his polling lead would dwindle to a very narrow lead. For the sake of the video, we're going to say that the polling aggregate would essentially be tied. And so that would shift the election 4.5% of the right. However, I do think Biden's approval rating would actually get worse. I think it'd probably be at around, well, for the sake of this video, let's leave it the same, just to kind of, leave it the same there. And then for the difference in approval ratings here, I'd expect Trump's approval rating to dip, considering that I feel like there'd be a lot of suburbanites, that wouldn't necessarily turn out for Trump, that would have under this circumstance. And so I do think that more than likely you could see their approvals being tied in the difference. And so when you factor that in, we do end up getting results from the electoral college here. And what you notice is that Donald Trump is winning fairly easily. You see these states, still vote safe Republican. We do have these states voting safe Republican. These states he won in 2020 by pretty safe margins. We have Alaska. As of right now, it is right above the 15-point margin. The popular vote is still 2.5 points for Trump. So instead of winning it by 5, he's winning it by 2.5. And this is including third-party voters. I guarantee you, if this is without third-party voters, you'd probably see Biden lead the aggregate as of right now in this scenario. However, when you look at this, you do see that certain states still vote for Donald Trump fairly easily. I mean, California is still safe. Hawaii is safe for Biden, as well as DC, Maryland, Massachusetts, and Vermont, as well as Maine's first congressional district. You do see, if you go to, for example, Rhode Island, it's right below the 15-point margin. It is right there. It is super duper close. Connecticut's actually safe now. Delaware is a likely state. It's a 12-point victory. New Jersey is a 9-point victory for Biden. So he does gain. I think Biden would net, some support, but it mainly because Trump voters would necessarily drop off, not necessarily because Biden is really gaining any support. If we look at Iowa, we actually see that in the state of Iowa, Trump's actually still winning that by a safe margin, and Ohio would still be safe Republican. They'd be over 16-point victories even in this scenario. Texas and Florida dropped to about 12.2 points and 13 points respectively, so they are still likely Republican states, very close to being safe. South Carolina would still be around a 20-point victory. You'd have a state like Washington be a 13.9 percentage point win, almost 14 point win. Oregon would be likely. Colorado would be a 9.5 percentage point win. Illinois would be a 10.5 point victory. New York in this scenario would be a 16-point win according to the model. If we looked at Virginia, we do see that it is a 4.1 percentage point victory for Biden. I'd say once Trump gets convicted, Biden probably will gain some support virtually in the suburban areas. That's why you're seeing states like Virginia. The nation does shift backwards, but you would see, some of these suburban states probably revert back. And this is without even predicting the individual polling averages in certain states. Maine at large would basically be a 4-point win for him now, so he'd be winning there by about 4 points. Trump would still be doing good in the second congressional district, but Maine at large would be around a 4-point victory. New Hampshire would be around a 3.7 excuse me, it would be a 1.4 percentage point victory for Biden. Minnesota, you saw there, is around a point victory for Biden on this model as of right now. So he's not even winning it by over 5. It's only a 1 point win, even in this scenario. And Nebraska is second as of right now, actually still goes lean Republican. New Mexico is still lean Democrat. It's actually 3.6 for Biden. So you're left with the traditional swing states, and you see Wisconsin and Pennsylvania vote, 6.7% Republican and 6 points Republican, respectively. The states are going to trend, to the right as of right now. And if we go to North Carolina, Trump is still winning by 8.3 percentage points as of right now. And in Georgia, you would actually see Donald Trump probably win by about 4.4 percentage points. Arizona, around 4.5 percentage points. However, I'd argue in this scenario, I think it would be a little bit closer. I think the polling in Arizona would get a lot worse for Trump compared to a state like Georgia. 4.5 points in Michigan, and in Nevada, we see a 6.6 percentage point victory. So Trump, according to the model, gets 313 to 225. However, this is only what my model suggests. And what I wanted to commentate on is basically that this circumstance would be so unprecedented that I think that the model may in fact predict a couple of states wrong. Now, we wouldn't necessarily have a lot of polling data to come out of these states. We don't really have any polling data. We do have hypothetical polling data that has, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania up by like 13 points, for Biden if Trump is quote unquote convicted. But the wording is very framed, and these polls were taken a while back, and they're not in the current present time when the event actually occurs. So we really can't say what would exactly happen. However, if you did have Wisconsin's polling data be like +4 for Biden, it would bring the margin down by like a tiny bit, literally like 0.6%. So even if there was huge polling shifts, it wouldn't be that much of a difference, because if the national environment still shows Trump ahead, then it's not going to really affect him that much. Now, we do see he does regress. My current model has him winning 327 electoral college votes. New Mexico goes blue, Maine at large, Virginia, but all the other states are way bigger victories. And Minnesota is lean Republican, New Hampshire's tilt Republican. And so this is what the map is showing. But I do think in a scenario where Trump gets convicted, I think both sides politically would be extremely polarizing. So for the sake of the video, I am going to actually do my own, projection based on what I think would happen if there was actually a conviction out of New York. I think that Trump would more than likely win his safe states, from 2020. Once again, I think the Trump base would be united, but I think third-party candidate support would taper off. I think Biden would probably start gaining, with some of these voters. I think Biden would probably get most of the third-party support from disaffected Democrats, because this would really energize Democrats to come back. I'd expect Washington and Oregon. Maybe Oregon's likely, but you would see that kind of occur. I think Connecticut, Rhode Island would be safe, but New Jersey, Delaware, I still think would be likely states. You guys got to understand that Biden's approval rating is so bad that even in this scenario, I still think Trump probably pulls out the victory, which is nuts. Iowa and Ohio, I think they'd be around 10-point victories. And Texas and Florida, I think Texas, you see like a 7-point win for Trump. Florida, I actually think you'd see it be a 6-point win. I think in this scenario, Texas actually votes to the right of Florida, mainly because you probably do have a high senior population here that probably would skew left because of this issue. And I think that that would actually make Florida still slightly more Democrat than Texas. But in a regular scenario, you would see Florida vote to the right of Texas. But I think in this scenario, Florida would still vote to the left of Texas by about a point because of that. I think Colorado would be around a 12.5-point victory. I think it wouldn't really change too much. However, Virginia would probably stay around the margin from 2020. It'd probably be in a 9.5-point win. Illinois, I think these Democratic states with a lot of African American support would get closer. Like you would see Illinois become likely Democrat. I think you'd probably see it being like a 7-point win for Biden, 8-point win. So the current margin right now, but it's trending right compared to the other states, because you are going to see Trump benefit from this conviction with African American voters. His spike with African American voters started when this whole conviction did occur. You know, when he first got his mugshot, that's when he really started improving with these voters. Alaska is interesting because I think it actually regressed quite a bit. I think Trump would probably only win the state by about like 7 points, maybe even six in this scenario. I think there'd be a lot of independents here who would just really disaffect from Trump, but I still think he'd win it by a likely margin. New Mexico, I think that Trump probably gets it under 5, which I know sounds weird, but I think Trump would also be doing really good with Hispanics. It's mainly the white vote that would actually keep a lot of these states Democrat. Like the white vote actually shifts way more Democrat, you know, compared to before. And we can even pull up a demographic model to kind of showcase this. I think Minnesota would still be like a 4-point win for Biden. I think New Hampshire would be around. I'd actually even say to be likely Democrat. I think New Hampshire would be likely. And you could even say the same thing for Minnesota as well. And it's kind of weird seeing New Mexico being under 5, but not Minnesota. But I think Trump and would basically gain with Hispanics and African Americans. And in a regular scenario, Trump would be improving with white voters, but I think in this scenario, he actually loses ground with a lot of them and loses a lot of ground with like 65 plus voters, while he gains with young voters. So I actually think New York would only be a 6-point win for Biden. It'd almost be the same margin as Minnesota. You would see a lot of Trump's base and a lot of voters here come out for Trump, but I still don't think it'd be enough. I think you'd see a similar margin to the Lee Zeldin thing from 2022. That margin would be kind of what you would see. Maine's second would be likely. Maine's first, would be safe. Maine at large, I think, would be likely for Biden. North Carolina, I actually think would probably end up being likely for Trump. I think he'd win it by around 7.5. Georgia, I think would probably be at a 4.5-point win for Trump. He'd win that fairly easily. I think he'd win it by around 4 points. You would see some suburbs in Atlanta trend, to the left, but I think the African American population would definitely shift to the right. I think in this scenario, though, I think Arizona actually goes Democrat, which is funny. I think it barely goes in the Democratic column. I think Joe Biden would narrowly pick off Arizona in this scenario, just because you do have that Maricopa County with a lot of McCain type of independents, and I think a conviction would really push the state to the left. So even though the popular vote here would probably be Biden +3, you would still see Arizona vote by the same margin. So I think that it would trend to the left this cycle, and I think in this scenario, Trump actually barely picks off Wisconsin. It's so close. Like, it'd be within a couple thousand votes, but Wisconsin would barely go to Trump in this scenario. I'd even say the same thing for Michigan. I think in Michigan, it'd be ridiculously close. I think he'd barely pick those off. I think in Nevada, he wins it by about like a point and a half, due to the support with Hispanic voters. I think Nebraska second would trend left off a cliff in this scenario. And Pennsylvania would be really hard to gauge because I think the Philly suburbs would really go to Biden here, but you'd have the rural areas kind of going for him as well. And would see Philadelphia, like city proper, really go for Trump, or at least shift towards him. So you could see the Rust Belt potentially be like tilt Republican. You see Arizona tilt Democrat. So this is the map I would think would happen. With a conviction, you'd see Trump do decent in the Sun Belt with Hispanic voters, lose some ground with white voters. That's why he's losing Arizona in this scenario. And I think there's just a big, decent amount of anti, MAGA / Trump support. And I think that would really push the state to the left. However, some disaffected Biden voters would still keep the state, within a couple points. But I do think Biden would win it by 0.8. Like, he'd actually improve from his 2020 margin. Do I think it's over a point? Probably not, just because of how unpopular he is, but I do think he'd outperform by a bit. But you would see him kind of struggle in the Rust Belt a bit. I think the next state he'd win here is actually Pennsylvania and then Michigan. So that's basically where those would go. If he were to win those, he could win the election. So if there is a conviction, I think unfortunately there is going to be a lot of independent voters that will shift towards Biden because of it, but Trump's base would be more, united and even more higher turnout. Right now, I expect Trump to get around 73 million votes, and Biden is getting around like 67, 68. But I think in a scenario where Trump gets convicted, I think you see Trump get like around 75, 76 million votes, maybe even more than that. Let's say 77 million, maybe even 76. we'll actually stick with 76 million, and Biden would probably get around 78 million votes, 79 million. So I think you'd see higher turnout there. And so even though Trump does get more votes, Biden would recuperate a lot of those third party voters and even some of his defected supporters, especially in a place like Minnesota, Colorado, Virginia, and a lot of voters in like Iowa, Ohio, Texas, and Florida that would vote for Trump. I think some of those would revert back, but I still think you'd see Trump win even with a conviction in this scenario. So if you guys did enjoy this analysis, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, make sure to go ahead and follow the Twitter and join the Discord server in the description down below. And I will see you guys very, very soon.